Captain Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Earth ship New Horizon, watching the alien planet grow larger on the main screen. The world looked like a giant green and blue marble floating in space. Strange purple clouds swirled around its surface, and 3 silver moons hung in the dark sky behind it. "Sir, we're getting a signal from the planet," said Alex Carter, the ship's translator. He was a thin man with messy brown hair who always looked nervous when dealing with alien communications. "They're giving us permission to land at their main city." Jake nodded and straightened his dark blue military uniform. At 35 years old, he had led many dangerous missions for Earth's space fleet, but this one was different. This time, he wasn't going to fight. He was going to talk.
"Hey, Dr. Morgan."
"Are you ready for this?" Jake asked the woman sitting at the science station. Dr. Lisa Morgan looked up from her tablet, where she had been reading notes about alien culture. She was in her early 40s, with short gray hair and smart green eyes. As Earth's best expert on alien societies, she had studied the Zephyrians for months preparing for this mission. As ready as anyone can be when meeting a completely different species, she said with a small smile. "Just remember, Captain, we need their help badly. The raider attacks on our colonies are getting worse every month. Without Zephyrian shield technology, we might lose everything." Jake knew she was right. Unknown alien raiders had been attacking human settlements on the edge of Earth's territory. Their weapons were too strong, and human defenses were too weak. The Zephyrians had shield technology that could protect entire planets, but they had never shared it with other species before. "What do we know about their leader again?" Jake asked, as the ship began its descent toward the planet. Alex pulled up a file on his screen. "Ambassador Kazera. She's high-ranking in their government. It's probably equivalent to our Secretary of State. The Zephyrians are reptilian, cold-blooded, and they live much longer than humans. Their society is very organized, with strict rules about who can do what." "Strict how?" Jake asked. Dr. Morgan frowned as she looked at her notes. "Very strict about gender roles, Captain. In their culture, females have limited rights. They can't make decisions without male approval. They can't travel alone, and they rarely speak in public meetings. It's difficult for someone like me to understand." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He had grown up with a strong mother and 2 sisters who could do anything they set their minds to. The idea of treating women as less than equal bothered him deeply. "We have to respect their customs," Dr. Morgan continued, noticing his expression. "No matter how we feel about them personally. One wrong move could end these negotiations before they start." The ship landed with a gentle bump in what looked like a massive crystal garden. Strange buildings made of clear-colored stone rose up around them like frozen rainbows. In the distance, Jake could see a city that seemed to be carved from one enormous crystal, with towers that twisted up toward the sky like glass trees. "Welcome to Velthor," Alex said, reading from his translation device. "The Zephyrians are waiting for us at the landing platform." Jake stood up and checked his sidearm, a standard plasma pistol that all Earth diplomats carried for protection. "Remember, we're here to make friends, not enemies. Let's go meet our hosts." The 3 humans walked down the ship's ramp and onto the alien world. The air smelled like flowers and something metallic that Jake couldn't identify. The gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth's, making each step feel bouncy. A group of Zephyrians waited for them at the bottom of the ramp. Jake had seen pictures, but meeting them in person was still surprising. They were tall, about 7 feet on average, with skin covered in small, colorful scales that seemed to change color slightly in the light. Their faces were somewhat human-like, but with larger eyes and no hair. Instead of hair, they had small, flexible spines that ran from their foreheads to the backs of their necks. The Zephyrian in front stepped forward. This one's scales were a beautiful mix of blue and silver, and the flexible spines on the head were longer than the others. Jake guessed this was a sign of high rank. "Greetings, humans from Earth," the Zephyrian said in accented but clear English. "I am Ambassador Kazvara. I welcome you to our world." Jake stepped forward and bowed slightly, the way Dr. Morgan had taught him. "Thank you, Ambassador. I am Captain Jake Sullivan, representing the United Earth Government. This is Dr. Lisa Morgan, our cultural advisor, and Alex Carter, our translator." Kesvara's golden eyes studied each of them carefully. Jake noticed that she stood differently from the other Zephyrians behind her. While the others kept their heads slightly down and their hands clasped in front of them, she stood straight and looked directly at the humans. There was intelligence in her eyes, and something else, maybe curiosity or even hope. "Please, follow me to the guest quarters," Kesvara said. "You must be tired from your long journey. Tonight we will have a formal dinner where you can meet the other members of our High Council." As they walked through the Crystal City, Jake couldn't help but stare at everything around him. The buildings seemed to grow out of the ground like plants, but they were clearly made by intelligent hands. Strange vehicles floated along invisible roads in the air above them, and Zephyrians of all ages moved through the streets on their daily business. But Jake began to notice something that made him uncomfortable. Every female Zephyrian he saw was accompanied by at least one male. Females walked behind the males, never spoke when Jake's group passed by, and kept their eyes down. The males did all the talking, all the decision-making, and all the interacting with strangers. Dr. Morgan, Jake whispered as they walked, "Is this normal behavior for their women?" "Fortunately, yes," she whispered back. "In Zephyrian society, females are considered property of their fathers until they're given to a husband. They have no legal rights, no political power, and no independence. Ambassador Kesvara is extremely unusual. She's one of the few females allowed to hold any kind of official position." Jake glanced at Kesvara, who was walking ahead of them and pointing out various buildings and landmarks. She seemed confident and knowledgeable, nothing like the other Zephyrian females they had passed. "How did she get her position?" Jake asked. "Father was a High Council member," Dr. Morgan explained. "When he died, she was allowed to take his place temporarily because she knew more about off-world affairs than anyone else. But it's still controversial. Many Zephyrians think she should be replaced by a male as soon as possible." Jake felt his respect for Kesvara growing. It must take incredible courage to work in a society that didn't want her to exist in her role. Their guest quarters were beautiful rooms carved from the same crystal material as the rest of the city. The walls seemed to glow with their own soft light, and the furniture looked like it had been grown rather than built. Kesvara told them, "At sunset, I will return to escort you to the formal dinner. There you will meet the High Council members who will decide whether to help your people or not." After she left, Jake sat on the strange, comfortable chair in his room and stared out the window at the alien city. Everything here was beautiful and advanced, but something felt wrong about a society that treated half its people as property. "I don't know if I can do this," he said to himself, watching Zephyrian females hurry through the streets below, always following a few steps behind their male companions, but he knew he had to try. Too many human lives depended on making this alliance work, no matter how difficult it might be to watch their customs in action. The formal dinner had been a disaster. Jake sat in his guest room the next morning, still thinking about the awkward evening. The Zephyrian High Council members had barely spoken to Dr. Morgan, treating her like she was invisible. When she tried to contribute to the discussion about defense strategies, they had looked at her with surprise and confusion, as if a chair had suddenly started talking. Jake had watched Kesvara throughout the meal. She sat at the end of the table, only speaking when directly asked a question. Even then, she had to wait for permission from Elder Supreme Velkarn, the council leader, before she could answer. It was painful to watch someone so clearly intelligent being treated like a child. Captain Alex Carter knocked on his door. "Ambassador Kesvara is here. She wants to show us the cultural district today, eh?" Jake opened the door to find Kesvara waiting in the hallway. Today her scales seemed more green than blue, and she wore a simple white robe that reached her ankles. Two male Zephyrian guards stood behind her, watching everything with sharp eyes. "Good morning, Captain Sullivan," she said with a slight bow. "I thought you might like to see how our people live their daily lives. It will help you understand our society better." "That sounds good," Jake said, though he wondered if he really wanted to understand a society that treated people so unfairly. Dr. Morgan and Alex joined them. The group left the government building together. The guards followed at a distance, but Jake could feel their eyes on them constantly. It was clear that Kesvara was not trusted to be alone with the humans. The cultural district was like a giant marketplace mixed with a museum. Zephyrian families walked through displays of art, history, and traditional crafts. Street vendors sold strange foods that smelled like cinnamon and something Jake couldn't identify. Children ran between the stalls, their small scales changing colors as they laughed and played. But again, Jake noticed the same pattern everywhere. The women stayed quiet, walked behind the men, and never made eye contact with strangers. It was like watching half the population live as ghosts. "This statue shows the founding of our first city," Kesvara explained, as they stopped in front of a tall crystal sculpture. "Over 3,000 years ago, our ancestors built their first permanent settlement here." Jake studied the statue, showed several Zephyrians working together to build a crystal structure. Were women involved in building the early cities? He asked. Kesvara's scales shifted slightly toward a darker green. "Women have always supported the work of building our civilization," she said carefully. "They provided the foundation that allowed men to achieve great things." It was a diplomatic answer, but Jake could hear the frustration in her voice. He was beginning to understand that Kesvara was walking a very fine line between doing her job and staying within the limits her society placed on her. "Ambassador," Dr. Morgan said quietly, "may I ask you something personal?" The guard stepped closer, but Kesvara nodded. "You may ask. What do you manage to do your job when your society has such strict rules about women in public roles?" Kesvara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do what I must to serve my people. The cost is mine to bear." They continued walking through the marketplace, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not just wrong with the society, but wrong with this specific situation. The guards were more tense than usual, and other Zephyrians kept staring at their group with hostile expressions. "Is everything okay?" Jake asked Kesvara, as they passed a group of male Zephyrians who were talking loudly and pointing at them. "Some of our people are not happy about the human alliance," she admitted. "They believe that contact with other species will corrupt our traditional ways." As if summoned by her words, 3 large Zephyrian males stepped out from behind a display of crystal art. They blocked the path ahead, their scales dark red with anger. The one in the center was bigger than the others, with military insignia on his armor and scars across his face. "Commander Thakmel," Kesvara said, her voice suddenly very formal. "I did not expect to see you here." "I'm sure you didn't," Thakmal replied, in a voice like grinding stone. "Just as I didn't expect to see you parading around with these alien contaminations, acting like you have the right to make decisions for our people." Jake felt his muscles tense. He didn't need a translation to understand the threat in the commanders. Voice Alex moved slightly closer to Dr. Morgan, ready to protect her if necessary. "I am doing my duty as assigned by the High Council," Kesvara said, standing straight and looking directly at the Skamal. "If you have concerns about the Alliance negotiations, you should address them through proper channels." Dekmo laughed, a harsh sound that made several nearby Zephyrians stop and stare. "Proper channels? A female telling me about proper channels? Your father may have fooled the council into giving you his position, but everyone knows what you really are." "What I am is a servant of our people," Kesvara replied, but Jake could see her hands shaking slightly. "What you are is a disgrace," Thakmal said, stepping closer. "Walking around without proper supervision, speaking to aliens as if you were their equal, making decisions that should be made by males. You have forgotten your place." The 2 guards, who had been following Kesvara, stepped back instead of forward. Jake realized with growing anger that they were not there to protect her. They were there to make sure she didn't step out of line, and now they were letting this happen. "Commander," Jake said, stepping forward, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Ambassador Kesvara was simply showing us your cultural sites as requested by the High Council." Dekmal turned his attention to Jake, his golden eyes filled with contempt. "Humans," he spat. "You come here with your strange ideas about females having voices, and you corrupt our society with your presence. This one forgets her place because she spends too much time around your kind." "She's doing her job," Jake said, his voice getting harder, and doing it well. "Her job is to be quiet and obey," Dekmal said. He turned back to Kesvara and backhanded her across the face. The sound echoed through the marketplace like a gunshot. Kesvara stumbled but didn't fall. A thin line of blue blood ran from the corner of her mouth. She wiped it away and straightened up, but Jake could see the humiliation and pain in her eyes. "That is enough," she said quietly. "You have made your point, Commander. There will be more. Careful about my behavior." But that Kamal wasn't finished. He grabbed Kesvara by the arm and shook her. "More careful? You think saying sorry is enough? You need to be taught a lesson that you won't forget." He pulled a plasma blade from his belt, a weapon that glowed with dangerous energy. "Maybe some permanent scars will help you remember your place." The marketplace had gone completely silent. Dozens of Zephyrians watched, but none of them moved to help. Even the guards just stood there, as if this was perfectly normal behavior. "Alex," Dr. Morgan whispered urgently, "we need to get out of here. Can't interfere with their cultural practices." But Jake couldn't move. He watched Thekmal raise the plasma blade, saw the fear in Kesvera's eyes, and felt something break inside his chest. He thought about his mother, who had raised 3 children alone after his father died. Thought about his sisters, who were both officers in Earth's military. Thought about Dr. Morgan, brilliant and strong and treated like furniture at last night's dinner. "No," he said, and stepped between Kesvara and the plasma blade. "Captain, don't," Alex shouted, but it was too late. Jake grabbed Thekmal's wrist and twisted it, using his military training to disarm the larger alien. The plasma blade skittered across the crystal ground, its energy flickering out. The Kamal roared in surprise, and swung his other fist at Jake's head. Jake ducked under the punch and delivered a hard blow to the Ekmal's midsection. The commander doubled over, gasping for air. The other 2 Zephyrians moved to help their leader, but Jake was ready for them. Had been trained to fight multiple opponents. He used their size against them, staying mobile and striking fast. Within minutes, all 3 attackers were on the ground. Groaning and holding various injured body parts, Jake stood over them, breathing hard, his fists still clenched. Turned to Kesvara, who was staring at him with wide golden eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly, but she looked terrified, not of Thekmal or his friends, but of something else. Something Jake didn't understand. The crowd of Zephyrians had grown larger, and they were all staring at Jake and Kesvara. Then, one by one, they began to make a low, humming sound. It grew louder and more complex, until it sounded like a song. "Oh no," Alex whispered, his face pale as he listened to his translation device. "Captain, do you know what you just did?" "Stopped a bully from hurting someone," Jake said, still confused by everyone's reactions. "You claimed her," Alex said. "According to Zephyrian law, when an outsider defends a female from attack, it means you're claiming her as your mate. You just accidentally got married." Jake stared at Kesvara, who was still looking at him with those wide, frightened eyes. The humming of the crowd grew louder, and Jake realized that his simple act of standing up for someone had just changed everything. Jake sat in a crystal chair that was definitely not designed for human bodies, staring at the 5 members of the Zephyrian High Council. The emergency meeting had been called within an hour of the incident in the marketplace. Now, 6 hours later, he was beginning to understand just how much trouble he was in. Elder Supreme Velkarn stood at the center of the council chamber, his ancient scales more gray than any other color Jake had seen on a Zephyrian. His golden eyes held no warmth. As he looked down at the human delegation, "Captain Sullivan," Velkarn said in his deep, formal voice, "do you understand what you have done?" "I stopped someone from hurting Ambassador Kesvara," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "In my culture, we call that doing the right thing." Several council members made hissing sounds that Jake was learning meant disapproval. Dr. Morgan shifted nervously in her chair beside him, while Alex kept checking his translation device, as if hoping it would give him better news. "In your culture, perhaps," said Council Member Drakver, a younger Zephyrian with bright red scales, "but you are not in your culture now. You are in ours, and you have invoked the Velthani bond." "Alex explained that to me," Jake said, "but I don't understand why defending someone means I have to marry them. That doesn't make sense." Elder Supreme Velkarn walked closer, his long robes trailing behind him. "The Velthani bond is one of our oldest and most sacred laws. It comes from a time when our society was forming, when protection meant survival. Enough, and committed enough to provide for her permanently. But I didn't know about your law, Jake protested. I was just trying to help. Ignorance does not change what has happened, said Council Member Sectra, an elderly female who was the only woman on the council. The ritual words were spoken. By the crowd, the bond has been witnessed and confirmed. You and Kesvara are now joined under our most sacred traditions. Jake looked around the room and saw Kesvara standing near the wall with 2 guards. She had been silent throughout the entire meeting, her head down and her hands clasped in front of her. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the crystal floor. What if I refuse? Jake asked. What if I say I don't accept this marriage? Temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The council members exchanged glances, and Jake could see something like fear in their eyes. To break the Velthani bond once it has been witnessed is the greatest crime in our society, Velkarn said slowly. It is considered a betrayal of the most sacred trust. The punishment is death for both parties. Jake felt his stomach drop. Both parties? You mean Kesvara would die too? She accepted your protection, Councilmember Drakver explained. By law, that means she consented to the bond. If you reject her now, it means she tricked you into protecting her under false pretenses. That is also a crime punishable by death. Dr. Morgan leaned forward in her chair. Surely there must be some alternative. In human culture, we have divorce annulment, legal separation. There must be some way to undo this that doesn't result. In execution, there is no precedent, Sectra said firmly. The Velthani bond has never been broken in 3,000 years of recorded history. It is unthinkable. Jake looked at Kesvara again. She was still staring at the floor, but he could see tears running down her scaled cheeks. This was not her fault. She hadn't asked him to defend her. She probably would have preferred to take the beating rather than put both their lives at risk. What exactly does this marriage require? Jake asked. What would I have to do? Elder Supreme Velkarn seemed surprised by the question. You would become her guardian and provider. She would live in your household, obey your commands, and serve your needs. In return, you would protect her, make all decisions for her welfare, and ensure she follows proper behavior for a Zephorian female. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. They weren't describing a marriage. They were describing slavery with ceremony. That's not a marriage, he said, standing up from his chair. That's ownership. You're asking me to treat another intelligent being like property. That is how our society functions, Velkarn replied. It has served us well for thousands of years. Females are protected and provided for. Males have the responsibility of leadership and decision-making. Oh, everyone knows their role and fulfills it. But what if someone doesn't want to fulfill that role? Jake asked, thinking of his own sisters who had chosen careers in the military. What if a woman wants to make her own decisions, have her own career, live her own life? The council members looked at him as if he had suggested that rocks should fly and birds should live underground. That is not possible, Drakver said. Females do not have the emotional strength for important decisions. They become confused and frightened without proper male guidance. It would be cruel to leave them to struggle alone. Jake wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but the situation was too serious. These people genuinely believed what they were saying. They had built their entire civilization on the idea that half their population was incapable of independent thought. I need to speak with Kesvara, Jake said, alone. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Finally, Elder Supreme Velkarn spoke. That is not appropriate. She is now under your authority, but proper supervision must be maintained. You may speak with her in the presence of council witnesses. Fine, Jake said. He walked over to where Kesvara stood and stopped a few feet away from her. Kesvara, look at me, please. She raised her head slowly, and Jake could see the fear and shame in her golden eyes. But there was something else there, too, a spark of the intelligence and strength he had seen when they first met. I want you to tell me honestly, Jake said. What do you want to happen here? Forget about laws and traditions and what other people expect. What do you want? Kesvara glanced quickly at the council members, then back at Jake. It does not matter what I want, she said quietly. I am female. My wants are not important. They're important to me, Jake said. I'm asking you, as one person talking to another person, not as a male talking to a female, not as a human talking to an alien, but as one individual who cares about another individual. What do you want? For a moment, Kesvara's composure cracked. Jake saw years of frustration and suppressed dreams flash through her expression, and she got control of herself again. I want to serve my people, she said carefully. I want to do my duty and bring honor to my family name. It's what you think you're supposed to say, Jake replied. I'm asking what you want for yourself. Kesvara was quiet for a long time. She finally spoke. Her voice was barely a rest. Whisper, I want to choose, she said. I want to make my own decisions, even if they are wrong decisions. I want to succeed or fail based on my own actions, not someone else's commands. I want to be responsible for my own life. The council members made more hissing sounds of disapproval, but Jake smiled for the first time since the whole mess started. Then, that's what we're going to do, he said. Captain, Dr. Morgan said urgently. What are you thinking? Jake turned back to face the High Council. I accept the Velthani bond, he said, but I want to propose new terms. There are no terms to negotiate, Velkarn said. The law is clear. The law says I become her guardian and provider, Jake said. It doesn't specify exactly how I have to fulfill those roles. Why don't you try something different? What do you mean? Zectra asked. Jake took a deep breath. This was either going to work or it was going to get them both killed. I want to show you what human partnership looks like, he said. Give me 1 month to prove that a male and female can work together as equals. If it works, if we're both happier and more productive, then maybe your people can learn something new. If it fails, then we'll accept whatever punishment you decide. The council chamber erupted in shocked whispers and angry hisses. Elder Supreme Velkarn raised his hand for silence. This is unprecedented, he said. Dangerous. It goes against everything our society believes. Sometimes the most important discoveries come from trying something that's never been done before, Jake replied. What do you have to lose by letting us try? Velkarn looked at his fellow council members, then at Kesvara, then back at Jake. 1 lunar cycle, he said finally. You have 1 lunar cycle to prove your theory. If you succeed in showing that this arrangement benefits both parties and causes no harm to our society, we will consider revising our interpretation of the Velthani bond. If you fail, both of you will face the traditional consequences. Jake nodded. Agreed. As the council dismissed the meeting, Jake caught Kesvara's eye. She looked terrified, but also hopeful for the first time since he had met her. Are you ready to try something completely new? He asked her. She straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. She said, I am ready. Jake woke up on his 10th day as a married alien and realized he was actually starting to enjoy it. Not the marriage part exactly, since he and Kesvara had agreed to keep things strictly professional. But working with someone who understood both human and Zephyrian thinking was making the alliance negotiations move faster than anyone had expected. The defense grid specifications are here, Kesvara said, spreading several crystal tablets across the table in their shared quarters. The High Council had insisted they live together to make the experiment realistic. But they had separate sleeping areas and treated each other more like business partners than spouses. Jake studied the technical drawings that appeared on the crystal surfaces. These shield generators are incredible. One of these could protect an entire Earth city. The power requirements are significant, Kesvara noted, pointing to a section of the diagram. Your current energy systems would need substantial upgrades. Over the past week, Jake had learned that Kesvara was not just smart, she was brilliant. She understood technology, politics, economics, and military strategy better than most of the male council members. But in normal Zephyrian society, all of that intelligence was wasted because females were not allowed to contribute meaningfully. 2 important decisions. Dr. Morgan will want to see these, Jake said. Her engineering background will help us figure out the power problem. They'd been working with Dr. Morgan and Alex every day, and Jake was amazed at how much they accomplished. When everyone could contribute freely, Kesvara had ideas that none of the humans would have thought of, and she understood Zephyrian technology in ways that would take Earth scientists years to figure out on their own. A soft chime indicated someone was at their door. Jake opened. It defines Council Member Sectra, the elderly female council member. She looked nervous and kept glancing around as if worried about being seen. "May I speak with you both?" she asked quietly. "Of course," Jake said, stepping aside to let her in. "Is everything okay?" Sectra sat down carefully in one of the crystal chairs. She looked older than Jake had noticed before and tired in a way that seemed to go deeper than just physical exhaustion. "I wanted to tell you that what you are doing is causing quite a stir among our people," she said, especially among the younger generation. Jake and Kesvara exchanged glances. They had been so focused on their work that they hadn't been paying much attention to outside reactions. "What kind of stir?" Kesvara asked. "Many young females are asking questions," Sectra replied. "They see you working as an equal partner with Captain Sullivan, contributing ideas and making decisions, and they wonder why they cannot do the same. Some have even approached their fathers and guardians asking for more freedom to pursue education and careers." Jake felt a mix of pride and worry. "Is that causing problems?" "Yes and no," Sectra said with a slight smile. "Traditionalists are furious. Commander the Gmal has been organizing protests, claiming that human influence is destroying our culture. But others are beginning to see the benefits of what you demonstrate." She paused and looked directly at Kesvara. "Several males have told me privately that they are impressed by your knowledge and capabilities. They admit they never realized how much potential was being wasted by restricting female participation in important work." Kesvara's scales shifted toward a lighter, or golden color. Jake had learned this indicated happiness or excitement. "But there is also danger," Sectra continued. "The traditionalists fear that if this experiment succeeds, it will mean the end of everything they believe in. They are planning something to disrupt your trial period." "What kind of something?" Jake asked. "I am not certain. But Commander the Kamal has been meeting with other military officers and conservative council members. They believe that if they can prove your partnership is harmful or dangerous, they can convince the High Council to end the experiment early." Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see Zephyrians going about their daily business. But now, he noticed things differently. He saw young females watching their group with curious eyes when they walked through the city. Saw males arguing in small groups, their scales shifting colors as they debated. The whole society was being forced to examine beliefs they had never questioned before. "What do you think we should do?" he asked Kesvara. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We should continue exactly as we have been," she said finally. "The best way to prove our point is to keep showing that partnership works. Results speak louder than arguments." Sectra nodded approvingly. "That is wise counsel, but be careful. Desperate people often do foolish things." After she left, Jake and Kesvara returned to their work. But Jake found it hard to concentrate, kept thinking about what they were really doing here. They weren't just trying to save their own lives anymore. We're challenging an entire way of thinking that had existed for thousands of years. "Kesvara," he said finally, "do you think what we're doing is right? I mean, we're basically trying to change your entire culture." She looked up from the crystal tablet she had been studying. "Do you think our culture is right the way it is now?" Jake considered his words carefully. "I think any culture that wastes the talents and dreams of half its people is making a mistake. But I also don't think outsiders have the right to force change on others." "You're not forcing anything," Kesvara said. "We are offering an example. Your people have a saying. I believe you can lead a creature to water, but you cannot make it drink." "Close enough," Jake said with a smile. "You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink." "Yes. We are leading the horse to water. Whether our people choose to drink is up to them." Their conversation was interrupted by urgent knocking. At the door, Alex Carter stood outside, looking panicked. "Captain, we have a problem," he said, rushing into the room. "Commander the Kmel has challenged you to single combat." Jake felt his blood turn cold. "What?" "It's an old Zephyrian law," Alex explained, checking his translation device. "If someone believes another person has committed a crime against their society, they can demand trial by combat. If Thekmal wins, it proves you were wrong, and the Felthani bond should be broken. If you win, it proves you were right, and the bond should be honored. What happens to the loser? Jake asked, though he was pretty sure he didn't want to know the answer. Death, Alex said simply. And if you lose, Kesvara dies too, because the bond gets broken. Jake sat down heavily in his chair. When is this combat supposed to happen? Tomorrow. At sunset, in the great arena, in front of the entire population, the High Council has already agreed to it. Kesvara stood up, her scales shifting to a deep, angry red. Combat does not prove who is right or wrong about social policy. It only proves who is better at fighting. Try telling that to 3,000 years of Zephyrian tradition, Alex said miserably. Jake looked at both of them, Alex worried and guilty, Kesvara angry and frustrated. Then he started to laugh. What could possibly be funny about this? Kesvara asked. I just realized something, Jake said. That Kamal made a mistake. He challenged me to single combat, right? One person against. One person? Yes, Alex said, confused. That's what single combat means. But I'm not a single person anymore, Jake said, grinning. According to Zephyrian law, Kesvara and I are joined. We're a unit. If someone challenges our partnership, they're challenging both of us. Kesvara stared at him. You want me to? Fight with you. I want us to fight together, Jake said. As partners, as equals. The whole point of this experiment is that we work better together than either of us could work alone, right? Let's prove it in a way that everyone can understand. Alex was frantically checking his translation device. Captain, I don't think. The law allows for joint combat in single combat challenges. Then we'll make new law, Jake said. We'll ask the High Council for permission to face the challenge together. If they say no, I'll fight alone. But if they say yes, we'll show everyone exactly what human partnership looks like. Kesvara's scales shifted to bright gold, and for the first time since Jake had known her, she smiled with genuine joy. Yes, she said, let us show them what we can accomplish together. That night, they stayed up late planning strategy, not just for the combat, but for the argument they would make to the High Council. They were asking for something that had never been done before in Zephyrian history. But then again, that's exactly what their entire relationship had been from the beginning. Are you scared? Kesvara asked, as they finally prepared to rest. Terrified, Jake admitted, but also excited. Tomorrow we find out if we're brave enough to back up everything we've been saying with our actions. Tomorrow, Kesvara. Agreed. We find out if partnership is stronger than tradition. The great arena was packed with every Zephyrian in the capital city. Jake had never seen so many aliens in one place before. Thousands of scaled faces looked down from the crystal seats, their scales shifting colors as emotions moved through. The crowd, like waves. The arena floor was made of smooth white stone that seemed to glow with its own light. Jake stood at one end of the arena, wearing light armor that the High Council had provided. Beside him, Kesvara wore similar protection, but she looked nervous. Despite all their planning, she had never been in actual combat before. Remember, Jake said quietly, we stay together. We watch each other's backs. And we show them that two people working as one team are stronger than three people fighting as individuals. At the other end of the arena, Commander Vekmal waited. With two other Zephyrian warriors, Agi had argued successfully that if he and Kesvara could fight together, then Nekamal should have the same advantage. The commander had chosen two of his most trusted soldiers, both bigger and more experienced than either Jake or Kesvara. Elder Supreme Velkarn stood in the center of the arena, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive space. Combat will determine the fate of the Velthani bond between Captain Jake Sullivan and Ambassador Kesvara. If they win, their partnership will be recognized as valid, and their way of living will be accepted. If they lose, the bond will be broken, and traditional law will be upheld. The crowd grew quiet as Velkarn raised his hand. Let the combat begin. The Scampling and his warriors charged immediately, expecting to overwhelm their opponents with pure aggressive force. It was exactly what Jake had hoped they would do. Left, Jake called to Kesvara, and they moved smoothly in opposite directions. The charging warriors found themselves running at empty air as their targets split apart. Jake rolled to the side and came up behind one of the HFY's warriors, landing a solid blow to the back of the alien's neck. At the same moment, Kesvara used her knowledge of Zephyrian anatomy to strike pressure points that temporarily paralyzed her opponent's right arm. The crowd gasped. In less than 10 seconds, the human and Zephyrian had turned a straightforward charge into a tactical disaster for their opponents. The HFY roared in frustration and swung his plasma blade at Jake. But Jake wasn't there anymore. He had moved. To support Kesvara, who was struggling with the larger warrior she had injured, together they managed to trip the big alien and send him crashing to the arena floor. How are they doing that? Jake heard someone in the crowd shout, "They move like they share one mind." Another voice replied. Jake smiled grimly. That was exactly the point. He and Kesvara had spent hours practicing, learning to anticipate each other's movements and cover each other's weaknesses. When Jake was strong, Kesvara was fast. When she was knowledgeable, he was experienced. Apart, they were just two individuals. Together, they were something new. Dekmal had regrouped with his remaining warrior, and now they were being more careful. They tried to separate Jake and Kesvara to force them to fight one-on-one battles, but every time one of them was in trouble, the other was there to help. "This is not how combat works," Dekmal snarled as he blocked a strike from Jake. "Fight without honor." "We fight as partners," Kesvara replied, ducking under his backswing and landing her own blow to his ribs. "That is what honor means to us." The battle continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Jake and Kesvara moved together like dancers, each one's strengths covering the other's weaknesses. When Jake's human strength wasn't enough, Kesvara's knowledge of Zephyrian fighting techniques made up the difference. When her smaller size put her at a disadvantage, his training and experience protected her. Slowly, inevitably, Vekmal and his warrior were worn down. They were fighting as three separate individuals against two people who fought as one unit. The math was simple. Teamwork was more efficient than individual effort. The end came suddenly. The Kamal made a desperate charge at Kesvara, thinking that removing her would leave Jake vulnerable. Jake was ready. He intercepted the commander's attack while Kesvara moved behind him. Together, they trapped the Kamal between them and disarmed him completely. The commander fell to his knees. Defeated and exhausted, his warrior had already surrendered. The arena was completely silent. Jake and Kesvara stood side by side, breathing, hard but victorious. They looked up at the thousands of Zephyrians staring down at them, waiting to see what would happen next. Elder Supreme Velkarn walked slowly to the center of the arena. His ancient face was unreadable as he looked at the four combatants. "The challenge has been decided," he announced. "Captain Sullivan and Ambassador Kesvara have proven their strength through unity. The Velthani bond will be honored." But the crowd's reaction was not what Jake expected. Instead of cheers or boos, there was excited talking. Zephyrians were turning to each other, gesturing toward the arena floor, debating what they had just seen. "Look at how they fought," Jake heard one voice say. Each one made the other stronger. "My daughter asks me why she cannot learn combat." "Skills," said another. "After seeing this, I think I should let her try." "Perhaps there are other ways to organize society," said a third voice. "Ways we have not considered." Over the following days, Jake realized that the combat had been just the beginning. The word of their victory spread throughout Zephyrian society, but more importantly, word of how they had won. Young Zephyrians, both male and female, began asking questions about partnership, cooperation, and equality. The High Council was forced to hold public discussions about gender roles, something that had never happened before in their history. Progressive council members argued that the combat had proven that males and females could work together effectively. Traditionalists claimed that Jake and Kesvara were special cases that didn't apply to normal Zephyrian society. But the questions kept coming. Females who had never been allowed to speak in public began attending council meetings and requesting permission to contribute ideas. Males who had never considered their female relatives as intellectual equals started asking for their opinions on important matters. Change is never easy, Dr. Morgan observed one evening as the four of them, Jake, Kesvara, Alex, and herself, shared dinner in their quarters. But once people see that a different way is possible, it's hard to go back to the old way. Alliance treaty was signed 2 weeks after the combat. Earth would receive Zephyrian shield technology, and in return would share medical and agricultural advances. But the real victory was quieter and more profound. Jake and Kesvara were asked to stay on Zephyria as cultural ambassadors, helping to facilitate the social changes that their partnership had inspired. They agreed, but only on the condition that their relationship would continue to be based on equality and mutual respect. So, Jake asked Kesvara one morning as they watched the sunrise over the Crystal City, "Do you think we actually changed anything important?" She pointed to a group of young Zephyrians walking through the streets below. Jake could see both, males and females in the group, talking animatedly together, treating each other as equals. 6 months ago, that would have been impossible, she said. Now it happens every day. Jake nodded. It's a start. It is more than a start, Kesvara corrected him. It is proof that individuals can change the world, one partnership at a time. As they watched, more groups of young Zephyrians joined the first group. Soon there was a crowd of them, males and females working together on some project, sharing ideas and responsibilities without regard for the old restrictions. You know what the funny thing is? Jake said. What? I came here to negotiate a military alliance. I never expected to accidentally get married and start a social revolution. Kesvara's scales shifted to the golden color that indicated amusement. Perhaps the best changes are the ones we do not plan for. Maybe, Jake agreed. But I'm glad we went through with it. All of it. Even the part where you had to fight 3 armed warriors to prove your marriage was legitimate. Jake laughed, especially that part. It's not every day you get to prove that love and partnership are stronger than tradition and fear. They stood, together in comfortable silence, watching their 2 very different worlds learn to work together. It would take years, maybe generations, for real equality to take hold in Zephyrian society. But the process had begun, and it had started with one simple human principle, that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Jake had defended Kesvara because it was the right thing to do. He had never expected it to change everything. But sometimes, he reflected, most important revolutions begin with one person simply refusing to walk away when someone needs help. And sometimes, 2 different worlds can find a way to make each other better.